Sawadee hello and welcome to another Victor Black Masterclass video. In today's video, I'm going to talk very briefly. This is one of my under 15-minute type videos, very briefly about what is my hair loss prevention strategy. Okay, had a number of questions posted on Instagram, on YouTube, and personal messages basically from people saying, look, I watched your video on DHT. Thank you very much. That makes perfect sense. Okay. Hair loss, human hair loss is beyond question. This is not even a conversation. Is beyond question the outcome from multifactorial stimulatory inputs. Okay. This is not a discussion. All right. We are way beyond the point of this being discussion in terms of our understanding of the stimulatory and inhibitory inputs on the health of the human hair follicle. The point of the previous video was to try to, kick to the curb this pervasive mythology that it's DHT is to blame, right? I think that even though that video was quite well received, I think you can tell by the way that I made that video that I accept there's just some people out there. I'm not going to try to convince them that their belief that it's DHT is not true. They need to come to that understanding in their own time. Okay, so let's move forward with the conversation and talk about, so if that's true, if DHT is one of a relatively long list of potential stimulatory and inhibitory inputs, what do we do about that? It's a very logical and rational position. Okay, and quite bluntly, the answer is logical and rational. You begin this discussion in the following way. Firstly, what you need to do is you need to create yourself a little list of what those potential stimulatory and inhibitory inputs are. Literally, just write them down. And then what you need to do is you need to ask yourself the following question. So what are you going to do about that? I think that's, hello fucking Captain Obvious, basically. So I wanted to make this video. This video is not, I repeat, this video is not intended to be a prescription for anybody. This is a relatively high-level strategic framework introduction to the premise of a multifactorial issue, human hair loss, and the only logical and rational way that an engineer, someone like myself, is going to approach solving a problem that has multifactorial inputs, and that is with a treatment strategy that addresses each one of those inputs in turn, not looking for a magic bullet, not expecting, one response to address all of the stimulus inputs. That to me is just, naivety in its extreme. So let's go through some of this. Is not intended to be a comprehensive, I didn't spend 3 hours writing this list out. This literally, I threw this together in 2 minutes, wanting to make this video to encourage people to learn more. This is a marketing video. This is not an education video. I repeat that. This is a marketing video to promote masterclass and my one-on-one consultation services. So we need to consider the following stimulatory inputs or inhibitory inputs. The first of which is chronic scalp tension. You need to ask yourself, what are you going to do about that? Hypoxia of the scalp tissue, which literally means a lack of oxygen flow in the scalp tissue, principally consequential to element one, scalp tension. What are you going to do about that? The impact of oxidative stress. What are you going to do about that? Of environmental stresses. Those are things like the time that you spend in the sun. Those are things like, using hair dryers. And so these are environmental stress factors. What are you going to do about that? The subject of microinflammation. This is the cascade of the basic events. First, we begin with chronic scalp tension, which basically leads to microinflammation and chronic stress, which then leads to a hypoxic state, which then basically leads to a cascade of events that ultimately creates a precondition whereby DHT can take a left or right turn that goes, DHT then becomes not a growth promoter, not a hair growth promoter, but a hair loss accelerant. So microinflammation, micronutrient deficiency. It is fair to say that this is probably the lowest element on this list for our community. If you follow my nutritional models, which basically means we eat a diet that is high in protein, moderate in fat, and high in carbohydrates, and rich in fruits and vegetables. You can pretty much cross a line through that. But it's fair to say that the general public tend not to eat enough fruits and vegetables. And it's certainly fair to say that in that condition, that there is a very plausible discussion about micronutrient deficiency having a role to play here. Then you need to basically look at some of the research that's happening in what I would call the novel stimulatory space, which is basically includes things like platelet-rich plasma growth promoters, protease inhibitors, prostaglandin imbalance. And then after you've gotten through that list, then absolutely 100%, I'm not for one moment that we don't need to take into account hormonal influences here. Androgens in general, DHT specifically, growth hormone and IGF-1, prolactin, and estrogen. I just want to talk very briefly about GH and IGF-1 and prolactin, because this, in my opinion, is not well understood. It is plausible that the elevated use of growth hormone and the consequential elevation of IGF-1 has potentially a negative consequence to hair. And that is not during the period of time under which you are using these products, because we would consider these growth factors to be positive influences hair. The problem becomes plausibly is when you take those stimulatory inputs away. There is a discussion to be had that says, look, it's plausible that the human hair follicle becomes accustomed or desensitized to some degree of the presence of those hormones at superphysiological levels, and then the consequential removal of those results in a situation where the hair follicle sees that as a growth hormone and IGF-1 deficiency, even though plausibly all you've done is basically lowered the level. So if you've been exposing yourself to extremely high elevated IGF-1 levels for extended periods of time, the argument becomes that the hair follicle becomes desensitized to that, sees that elevated state as as the natural way of things. Then you remove that elevated state, and the hair follicle basically sees the consequential second phase as a deficient state, and we see a degradation of hair quality consequential to that. The obvious answer to that is using a relatively small amount of growth hormone on a consistent basis. Don't blast and cruise with the growth hormone and the IGF-1. Prolactin, for those that don't know, people that don't know, prolactin is a very easily demonstratable negative influencer on the health of the human hair follicle. Elevated prolactin is not something that we want to create positive, healthy hair follicles. Okay, so very easy to control. Prolactin modulation basically begins with dosage, compounded dosage selection, and obviously for those that are not familiar, the drug Masteron. This is the great irony of the drug Masteron. It's very plausible that Masteron is actually, in this regard, providing some benefit to your hair despite its reputation, because Masteron rather, is a prolactin inhibitor. So you don't want to be walking around with elevated levels of prolactin, because that is not a hair healthy positive input. And of course, estrogen. Estrogen is our friend. We do not want to create an environment in our physiology where we have suppressed estrogen levels, or massively elevated estrogen levels and low androgen levels for that matter. Estrogen and androgens exist in human physiology in a ratio. And the idea that we have massively elevated androgens and suppressed estrogens, or alternatively, massively elevated estrogens and suppressed androgens, does not bode well for pretty much every part of our life, from cognitive function to cardiac function to even hair health. Okay, right. So the point of this video, gentlemen and ladies, is this, and that is, if I'm honest, I do feel at times that people are looking to be spoon-fed, okay? And that's completely okay. I don't have a problem with that. I'm in the service business. So people will basically see my free content and want me to answer questions that are behind the paywall for free. Or they want me to answer questions that I would normally undertake on a consultancy basis for free. This is a great example. I've had many, many, many people reach out to me and say to me, okay, so we'll take on board your point, what are the other inputs, as it were, and what we should do about it, that you wouldn't believe the number of people I've given that link, and not one person consequential that has actually booked a consulting session or basically become a masterclass member as a consequence of seeing that content and ask a question. And I don't understand why. I have no problem answering this question for free. The premise here, guys, is what you see when you look at YouTube, what you see when you look at Instagram, is designed to market my services either as a consultant or to market my services as an educational information provider. In this circumstance, I'm setting that aside to make the point. It's not terribly difficult. Understand that DHT basically is one of the elements that belong on that list. It's not the reason that we have hair loss issues, right? It's one of those elements. And if you're looking for a strategy for the treatment or the prevention of hair loss, it's really very simple. You write down a list of the potential stimulatory and inhibitory inputs, and then you ask yourself the question, what, if anything, can we do about those things? And then basically make a short list and then take action and then basically observe the outcome, and you make adjustments over time. This is a strategy of an engineer, and this is why I believe that I am very good at what I do, because I see everything through the eyes of the engineer. So I hope you enjoyed that content. Please, guys, understand, if you take nothing away from this, over the coming months, over the coming years, you're going to see snippets of information from me. I make no apologies. I'm not trying to provide the solution publicly to these things. I create some free information, which hopefully triggers interest from some people. They go, that's very interesting. I'd like to find more about that. And I offer them to do that on one of two bases, either on a one-on-one consultation where we can talk about specific prescriptive solutions for an individual based on their unique genetic needs, or alternatively, in a guys like us do things like this fashion through my masterclass educational content. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Victor Black Masterclass. Sawadee Cup.